I spent my life sort of gathering, poor Richard, gathering wisdom from odd places, from books by great scholars, from fortune cookies, from overhearing conversations on the subway when I lived in New York, from listening carefully and just deciding that it is now imperative for me to just tell people what they really need to do.
Welcome to the musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
I'm John Timpain.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference. Today, the musical Innertube welcomes back one of our best beloved guests, Gina Barreca. Brilliant person, memoirist, scholar on women's use of humor, very comic, opinion writer. Gina is a distinguished professor of English literature and feminist theory at the University of Connecticut, where she's been teaching since years began with 19. Among the wonderful books with equally wonderful titles coming from her teeming mind are They Used to Call Me Snow White, but I drifted. If you lean in, will men just look down your blouse? Too much of a good thing is wonderful. It's not that I'm bitter, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying About Visible Panty Lines and Conquer the World, and Fast Famous Women, 75 Essays of Flash Nonfiction, which she was last here talking about, I believe. And today's Gina's with us to discuss her brand new book, Gina School. It's just a wonderful collection of aphorisms, apophthegmata, sententiae, and bite-sized bonbons of wisdom. Gina really takes us to school in this book, and a wise, sweet, chuckle-peppered place it is. Gina School reminds us why Don and I say we'd sooner take advice from Gina Barreca than from anyone else. Welcome back to the musical Innertube, Gina Barreca.
I am so delighted to be here with both of you. And also I want to have just everything that you said in that introduction sort of tattooed somewhere. That was just the nice.
I doubt you have space. Anyway.
I was just saying before we started, I recently had surgery. I think I could have it right over the scars. I could have that nice idea of all of those lovely statements right over what I think now sort of makes me look like a stuffed toy where the stuffing is coming out, a little bit like the Velveteen Rabbit or something. I feel like it's a little, but thank you very, very much. And I'm delighted and honored to be in your company today.
So we've heard John's summation of your book. Do you want to hear mine?
Yes, please.
I think it's kind of like Poor Richard's Almanac with all the weather crap. It's sayings to live by and ways to live your life. And I assume that comes from your life and the way you've lived it over the years.
Well, 68 years of, just being around various blocks, being around the teacher block where I spent my life sort of gathering, poor Richard, gathering wisdom from odd places, from books by great scholars, from fortune cookies, from overhearing conversations on the subway when I lived in New York, from listening carefully and just deciding that it is now imperative for me to just tell people what they really need to do. Half of these are reminders to myself. They really are. They are they're the equivalent of taping Post-it notes around you. There are one of my favorites. I mean, they're all my favorites. And they're very, as you said, sort of short, sharp, and beautifully illustrated. So one of my favorites is 56. It says, your favorite song might be one you haven't heard yet. Here's to hope. And, when bad times come, as they inevitably do, it's understanding that you have to make room, that everything you lose makes room for something new, and that that your very favorite thing may be something you have yet to encounter. And that even as we grow older, obviously you guys don't, but I do. As we grow older, it's, not just looking at the good times that were behind us and being grateful for them, but of making sure that there's space for anticipation and curiosity and the kinds of conversations that the two of you are known for having, provoking, right? But it's about ideas. So it's not just the old ideas, but about the new ones that you're going to make with friends or strangers or just with the experiences that are still coming towards us. Let's hope they're good.
And I'm glad that Don mentioned that particular bonbon, because when I read it, it reminded me, and in a very healthy and needed way, that the act of hope also includes faith, doesn't it? That you're giving yourself up to life in some ways and thinking, well, something good might happen. You never know,
Exactly.
right? One never know, do one. I mean,
One never know, do one. And it is it's looking at the past, we sentimentalize it. We look at what we've done and think, oh, am I ever going to be able to do something new again? Am I ever, am I stuck in the same loop? Is this some closed circuit that I'll just be on forever? And when things are scary in the larger world, and when things get scary in our personal universes, it's sometimes it's just good to be reminded, in again, not large philosophical senses, but in really small doses, in the bite-sized pieces, that there's a chance everything will be okay, and that that's a chance that we've got to take. Yeah, we got to. That's the bet we have to make.
What's so wonderful, among many other wonderful things in the book, is how gently you approach certain things. I wouldn't say obliquely. Actually, you'll be in the middle of a piece of advice and reading it, or an epigram that you've written on something, and suddenly you realize, oh, she's talking not really about the scariness of things, but about anxiety. And how anxiety, that is the practice of anxiety, that is the day-to-day maintenance. Many of us are anxiety industries, aren't we? And we maintain anxiety. That's what you want to talk about a little bit, about the waste of time that it often is.
Right. And, that again, one of them is I spend a lot of time being worried that I don't have enough time. Like I spend a lot of time thinking like, I don't have time for this. And I just realized that I've spent the morning thinking, I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to do that. And if I had spent the time that I again, as you said, sort of maintaining my anxiety or nourishing it and sustaining my anxiety, that I actually could have done something that would have mitigated it. But anxiety is a practice. And I know that there are, people have very healthy ways of dealing with it. Mine are to try to contain the terror of the fear of not knowing what'll happen, of the possibilities that, hope won't be enough, by putting things into words and by trying to come up with a practical outlook on something. It's sort of the equivalent of just putting it as clearly as possible. And that was sort of the fun part and the daunting part of writing Gina School, where which is, if it's 103, if I'm doing my math right, 103 sort of ways of looking at the world. So that number 96, for example, is you earn your courage. You build on your courage. And when necessary, you can draw on your courage. You probably have more than you realize. Use it. Don't hide it. Hide behind it or allow it to be buried with you. You're braver than you think. And that's sort of another reminder. It's actually, since you brought up anxiety, I'll just go for the anxiety ones. Number 92 is tell your frightened or despairing younger self that she can borrow your courage. Tell your worried or bereft older self that she too can draw on your account. When times are tough, we can lend ourselves strength. And the illustrator, John Guillemette, did a series of paper dolls holding hands. So it's these senses of the self through time that are separate but connected. And I think of that after having taught, you said, since the 1900s, at UConn since 1987, at the University of Connecticut, in Storrs since 1987. I have students who are now retired. I'm not retired, but I have students who had the wisdom.
Don't retire, please don't.
I do. Well, I really still like what I do, and but I have students when they're 18 or they're 21 or they're 25, and they're terrified that what their later lives will bring. They're like, what if I'm 40 and I'm living in my parents' basement? What if I'm 40 and I'm dreadfully alone? What if I'm 40 and I can't find a job? What if I'm 40? And I say to them, if I feel confident about it, I say, I know your 40-year-old self, and that person is fine. And like, what does your 40-year-old self need to tell you now that'll make you feel better? And it's mostly that it'll be okay. And it might not look like anything you think it'll be, but it'll be okay. What would you guys say to your 20-year-old selves?
I would say, stop being a horse's ass.
But I said that to you, John, when you were 20. So.
You said it repeatedly, Don, and had I listened, had I only listened.
I don't know, maybe stop drinking so much? I don't know. I don't know.
John was never I wouldn't say you were an out of control tippler, Don. I think you were quite, not abstemious. That would be a lie that I, am not being paid to tell. But,
I didn't wake up in any gutters. We'll put it that way.
Don was a great guy when he was that age. I don't think I was. So I would say be better, I think. But also I think you're right. When I look back at myself, and maybe Don can add his thoughts to this, not about me necessarily, about him, but I needed courage.
Mm-hmm.
I needed courage about a lot of things,
Yeah.
And
what's interesting to me, and when you talk, Gina, about all of the students you have now, and I see that in young people that I deal with now, because I have a couple of areas of my life where I have to deal with people in their 20s and people in their 30s and people just into their 40s. And I do see a lot of anxiety, or a lot of people that what if, and you're right, a lot of it is forward looking. What if I make a wrong turn? What if I don't do this? Not a lot of regrets necessarily. Oh, I should have done this when I was 20, but more looking forward and worrying about making a wrong turn. And I'll be honest with you, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I didn't really think that much. I just took the turn when it came. And maybe that's something that would be my failing. But I was in radio when I first started out, and I just took the next radio job, and I would last a year or two at one and move on to the next city, and not really thinking about it. I didn't get to the chance of thinking and worrying and figuring things out until I had a family when I was in my late 30s. So I think that maybe you're right. And I don't know where this comes from young people now being so uptight about their lives and their future. They, generally speaking, kids in their 20s don't have a good sense of what their future is, but kids in their 20s nowadays are really worried about it, I think.
I think that actually, I think your observation is right. That, I mean, when I have a lot of students, and most of them are in the humanities, but not all of them. I teach courses on, narrative and medicine and narrative. And, so there are kids who are pre-med, or they're nursing students, or they want to become therapists, or, and so they're not all in the humanities, but a lot of them are English majors or history majors. And there's what I've seen over the difference in teaching for 37 years, soon to be 38, that maybe 38 now from doing, again, the math. I could not have gone to math. They say, well, you always knew. They dismiss it, and they're always like, well, you always knew you'd be a professor. And I was the kid in college who, if you had said she's going to be a professor, people around me would have pointed and laughed. They would have been, they're like, yeah, she's going to be a professor. Yeah. And then she's going to be like an acrobat and then go into the ballet russe, that.
Yes, of
Like,
course.
they were as likely as a 5'3" little Italian girl going into the ballet. That was not, I mean, really the odds were the same. And so I backed in to my professional life in very much the same way. I had no idea. I was an English major. All I knew as a first-gen college student and the first girl in my family to graduate from high school in a timely fashion, was that I needed to make a living. So I knew I needed, I always worked. I worked in high school. I worked through college. I worked, in the summer. I mean, I had to make money. I had to pay back loans. I had to do all the rest of it. And, there wasn't going to be family money, like to make that happen. One of the things I would want to go back and tell the kid that I was, and actually, because my mother died, I've spoken about this before. My mother died when I was pretty young, when I was a teenager. And so it was my father who suddenly, at age, he was 50, and he made bedspreads and curtains in a family factory with his brothers and sisters. He worked 6 days a week, and suddenly he had this kid to raise. I have one brother who's 6 years older than I am, so he was out of the house and on his own. And so we had to figure like each other out for my last couple of years of high school. And it was very much a sense of you can do whatever you want. There were no expectations for me to live up to. I was not supposed to get pregnant, in high school. And I was not supposed to go to jail. Those were like, other people's families, I think, are more like the families of the students.
So demanding.
It really was. But again, that gives you like the trajectory of what,
Guardrails are very wide on those.
Really?
Yeah.
I was just going to say that.
And so he was just hoping for the best for me, but I didn't have to live up to other people's expectations. And when I got to college, I started to feel the sense of freedom attached to that, because other kids, they were there to be pre-med, or they were there because they were supposed to get into the law schools that their fathers went to, or they were supposed to be exactly what their parents were paying for them to go to school to be. And I didn't have that script. Again, not getting knocked up, not going to jail. So and so I took what jobs looked good. I did internships. It wasn't about, I just needed to pay my bills. So there wasn't some big overarching ambition. And that let me do things. So when I tell students, I had no idea what I was going to do until I was like 26, 27. They're like, "No, you're just saying that to make me feel better." It's like, on some level, I wish I were. But no, I had no idea. John, when did you decide you were going to become an editor, a writer, a radio person?
Well, I was a professor for 20 years first, and I did that about as conventionally as you can imagine. I did the whole thing, got the FUD after the BA, and
but did you want to do that? Did you know you wanted to do that? Unlike me, did you set out?
I know the very moment when I knew I did. Yeah, I do. Yeah, a friend of mine came over one night, and she had a big seminar on T.S. Eliot, and she said, "John, what's the Four Quartets about?" And we looked up, and it was 6:30 a.m. After we got done talking, and she went off, and I think she passed. And but the thing is, that experience of just sitting with a friend and poring over T.S. Eliot revealed to me, which I had not known before that. Such simple, since you ask.
Yeah.
Now, the editor thing just can't. As Don will tell you, I have always been a freelance writer. In the background, always done that, and then as part of that, went to the Inquirer to be a writing coach, and one day they offered me a dang job, and my salary was just pitiful, and
Right.
I probably was pretty stuck where I was. And I said, I'll try that. The heck, kind of
Yeah.
the wildest thing I ever did. I don't have a wild background, right, Don?
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, yeah, and I did that as long as I did being a professor. So I do know that moment, but up to that moment, I had no idea what I wanted to be. I don't,
Mhm.
you know.
And
Yeah.
Don was born. I think Don was born for the microphone. I think Don was born for radio and later for television. He's got, as you know, one of the great voices in the world, and just this great sort of presence. And when I first met him, well, first of all, I haven't said ever this. I'm talking about Don when he decided to do what he wanted to do. He was already doing it when I knew him in high school. He just didn't put a
Yeah,
name on it.
yeah.
Right, Don? I think you were already doing it in high school. You were, and
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
was. We were, there were a couple of us who were interested in radio, and we would do uh, cassette tapes of radio shows.
some of which still exist, and I hope someone has destroyed them.
But,
oh no.
but no, we imitated what we heard on the air, and of course, our technical knowledge was very limited, so we would like play it on our record player and hold the microphone up to the record player and then come back and talk and that sort of thing. But you're 14 years old, 16 years old. So what is your sense of humor? Farts, things like that. And unfortunately, when I got to be in my 20s and was actually doing it with real equipment and on the airwaves, I was still doing fart jokes. So, take for that what you will. But my point, going back to the point I made earlier, is I didn't really stop to think about how to plan this. I know I was working at one station where there was a newsman that had a plan in mind. I want to be in this size market by the time I'm this old, and I want to be in this because as you got into bigger cities, you got more money supposedly and this and that and the other thing. So he had it all planned out, and all I could think of, and I never told him this to his face, but I thought about it all constantly, is what a jerk. Uh, because what I what I had seen
Yeah,
is that the
yeah,
best laid plans of mice and men, you could plan out all you want, and then something happens along the way, and you get detoured either majorly or a couple of minor detours. So I just kept going where I was, and yeah, and taking whatever the next job was. And I think that, I mean, that served me well in the sense that I never really, there were a couple of jobs that I worked when radio said, we don't need you anymore. And the next radio station was about a year away. So yeah, I've worked retail and I've worked
Right.
in places where I didn't want to work just to make the bills, but those were short. And as a career, I've just done what I wanted to do. And I think somebody said to me, if you do what you love, then you're never working. So,
right.
And I think to an extent that's true because there were I learned actually to read that's one of those things that I've rethought. Um and in part because so many of the young people over the years have said to me something like you know I want to do something I love. And it's like, okay, that's great, but you have to make the bills so that I know that again in doing what I mean, again going back to what I understood about what adult life meant. The first thing was about having to pay the rent. So that when the students are saying, okay, I got so many, I teach creative writing, there are so many students who I want to be a novelist. And it's like, terrific. So we have to write we talk about that. But it's like, how are you going to make rent? How are you going to pay your bills? I don't know. I know a number of successful writers. I don't know anybody. I mean, I've met Stephen King. I've met Don DeLillo. I mean, but in passing. I mean, these are not not writers of like in the way that models are not human beings. I mean, do you ever see real models? They don't look
Yeah.
like human beings. They
No.
don't. They're not just pretty people. They're like of another species.
Yes.
People who make $19 million from the movies that are done, from the films that are, based on the screenplay based on. So my students who are just like, but I want to write a novel that then will become a Netflix series. And I'm like, I would like to flap my arms and fly to the moon. This is like, don't worry. It's like, because they're coming in already with this idea that they don't have to work, because they're going to do the thing that they love. And because they love it, they will therefore be successful at it, because the passion they're bringing to it will be enough to sustain them. And I don't think that's correct, actually, because the world is, and there's a version of this in Gina School, that the world basically is not necessarily going to pay you for something it didn't ask for, that it may not want. And just because you want to give it to them does not mean you are automatically going to find someone who is going to pay you for it. And that's a tough lesson to learn. And I remember when I worked just one summer, but at Bloomingdale's and in New York City. And what I realized is that the best time of my working life at Bloomingdale's was the 10 minutes that I would go to the ladies' room, go to the restroom. And I would sit there and think, I can sit here for 10 minutes. I'm just looking for the page. I can sit here for 10 minutes and they will pay me for these 10 minutes. And I have to go back on the floor, but these 10 minutes are mine. And I thought, I can't spend my life doing that. Like that was like, I can't do that. I think, like, and if you're just going to work for money, then you could just sell drugs to school children. I mean, if that's all you're going to do,
Right, of course.
you want to make money, or the easy thing to say for people who just want to write
Worked for me.
Yeah, right. Is that if you're really just going to write for money, the only thing you can guarantee writing for money is ransom notes. But that you have to then make sure that you've got people doing the backup heavy lifting for the ransom notes to work. But that's the only writing for money, and increasingly difficult. I mean, I now and feel lucky to be able to write for, as they are now called, outlets.
Yeah.
Some large outlets that they don't pay. I mean, they used to pay $1,000 or a couple of grand. I'm talking, media, big media station.
Sure.
And now, they're saying, you'll get placement on the first page, or you'll get this, and it'll get that many downloads, but there's no pay. It's
right.
They consider
the world in which we first met, Gina, does not exist even. When I could pay you $100, I mean, that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Gina School 22, lesson 22. It's a clock. It says every young person should have a job for an extended period of time where they need to show up on time, in clean clothes, fully sober, wide awake, in a convincingly cheerful mood. Work matters. Having a job matters. And that, if that means performing adult life, that's performing adult life. You may not want to. I don't care. I mean, and this is, and some of them, again, John, I don't know, it was like in your classes, your enthusiasm, your love of what you were teaching, I'm sure it came through. But I come in like Ilsa of the SS for my 2.5 hour seminars, about 40 kids.
That's pretty serious.
Classes, and 15 to 19 in the creative writing classes. And I tell them from the first day, I'm the last one in this classroom. Nobody comes in here after me. I mean, this is like, it's the 10 commandments. No one comes in after me.
What a great rule.
What a great rule. And I tell latecomers are not welcome. I don't care. A meteor hit your car on the way in. That's sad.
No one admitted after the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. No,
there you go.
Right. This is not like that. Right. This is where I came in. That doesn't happen. You have to show up. I give writing at the beginning of every class that they cannot make up. So if they are not there for the first 10 minutes, they can't make up that assignment. That goes towards their grade. There is no AI. there is no electronic device. So I tell the students, so I don't have to deal with AI because it's not permitted. And I have colleagues who say, how do you get away with that? It's like, it doesn't occur as an option. It's
Right.
not, it's not heresy because there's no other option. So that on the first day of class, I tell them there are no laptops, there are no screen.
iPhones. Yeah.
If you have one of those watches, it's off. It's in the knapsack under your chair. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I don't turn my back on a crowd. So, I mean, I don't use the blackboard. I don't write on the whiteboard. I don't use they all have to buy a hard copy of the book.
Right.
So they're not reading anything on the screen. They take notes in a notebook. So they have to bring in a notebook and they write, which they could use for their in-class writings. They can do that. They have to refer to the text with page numbers, with everything there. They have to learn one another's names. And I tell them, I said, on the first day of class, I explained that, if I see you with your hands in your lap on the first day, I will give you the benefit of the doubt and assume you're masturbating. Because there are people on campus who can help you with that, right? References, referrals.
Yeah, if you could get somebody else to do that for you, that's great. The campus is full of those folks. Yeah,
exactly, right. But the second time, I will simply call you out on it, and you're welcome in the class. And you just see them register, their limbic brains or something like, she said masturbate.
Right.
It's like
it can be a shock.
She'll say it again if she sees me with my hands in my lap. So they're not waiting now. So the ones who are going to drop out, and there's usually a waiting list, so the classes fill. But a lot of them now have not been in a place for 90 minutes without being connected, and they're like, but what if there's a crisis? And I said, then we'll all go together when we go. It's like that. If there's a crisis, I'll let you know. If the sirens go off, we'll finish the paragraph, and then there's nothing that you're not going to be able to do with.
I love the one where you say, if somebody asks you, "Are you mad at me?" you better instantly ask yourself, "Well, why is this person mad at me?"
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, first of all, the shock of recognition was major there, but also it's really good to sort of stay awake to your relationships, not make them be what you think they are, but to just look at them in a state of nature and try to suss them out and keep a running tab on it, that the things that people tell you actually often mean, if not the opposite, they're trying to tell you something else. And I'd love you to talk about that because it is such a fulminant insight. It opens up and flowers in so many directions.
Oh, that's a nice way of putting it. That was the idea that if somebody says, "Why are you mad at me?" you better look at why they're mad at you. Was a hard won lesson. I didn't say that. That was something that I wish I knew when I was younger, because I spent a lot of time going to whatever poor young man I had chosen as the target of my affection, and I used target rather than object. I mean, I was like, I had a complicated and I would say unreflected, because God knows I spent a lot of time thinking about it, but misguided inner life, where I had a lot of objects of attachment that really had very little to do with what was going on, at the moment. And the poor soul who was cast in that relationship was like a snowman that I had built, out of circumstance and out of proximity, and, had very little to do with the individual young man at the time. And, but I spent a lot of time saying, "Why are you mad at me? Why don't you love me? Why don't you give me what I need?" when I was really thinking, I don't love you. And I am so pissed off at you, but I didn't dare allow myself to feel that, because that would have put me in a vulnerable state, because I would have had then to act on those emotions. And those emotions were unacceptable as far as I was concerned, especially as a girl. I couldn't be angry. I could be hurt. Hurt was perfectly acceptable. I've grown up in the family that I grew up in this big Italian histrionic sort of world. Women were allowed to cry, women were allowed to be mourners, but they were not allowed to say what they wanted out loud. So everything had to sort of bounce off surfaces like in a pool table. So there was a lot of deflection going on. And so this is where therapy can pay off. So I've been in a lot of therapy. And that's also reflected, I think, in Gina School. And the book actually opens in the introduction, because I figured, again, if I'm not going to be honest here, where am I going to go? I'm saying, Gina School and Introduction, which is not to be confused with the admission brochure, that this introduction came easy. I'm simply doing what I've done since that glorious day when I could afford the copay for therapy. I'm attempting, thank God, again, my salary isn't great, but my healthcare is excellent. And that's the other thing. I mean, that, my students are like, again, I want to be a writer. I want to be an influencer, which is not a job. And so I want to do that. And I said, yeah, but does it include dental?
Exactly.
Exactly.
I really want
That's
to
got to
know
be the main question.
does it include dental? Because after 26, honey, if you're lucky enough to come from a family that you're on a healthcare plan, at 26, you're going to have your own. And
Right.
so, the book, I'm trying to provide an origin story and a justification for existence. And so I really, that's what the stories are about. But it's, the idea of looking, as you said, looking at our emotions and understanding, again, how much we are more alike than we are different, and on the inside, so that there's a lot about humor, of course, in the book, and so that less than 80.
Oh, Gina, since you mentioned humor,
Yeah.
please, could you read 97 aloud?
Okay. This is, and when we come back, I want to talk about how hard it was to do the parts on humor, because it's what I've spoken about for so long.
Oh my God.
So keep a sense of humor on you at all times. Using humor leads to recuperation, restoration, and redemption. Often the worst moments can transform themselves into the funniest stories. Humor allows you to get your spiritual deposit back from periods of tragedy, betrayal, loss, and fear. It's emotional recycling at its best. Once you make an event into a story, it's no longer just something that happened to you. You control it. If you hone it to a fine point, humor can be the instrument you use to pick the lock of pretty much anything that's trying to keep you out. And it's a little device, picking a lock, that John Guillemette chose, which I love. But I really thank you for liking this one. I mean, it's really, I do believe in the getting your deposit back theory of humor. And I do believe redemption is not a word I use that often, but I believe in it, because if you ask a group, if any of us ask a group of people, or a random group of strangers, like if I do a workshop or something like this, and you say, okay, what's the story, as the English would say, what's the story you dine out on? Right? What is the story you tell? That usually it's, again, about a moment, that something that happened to you, but gives a glimpse into your inner self that you present publicly. Most people will start that story, or the kernel, the essence of that story will be something disastrous that happened to them.
Right.
People, in fact, are not going to tell you, unless, and if they do, they're the people you want to move away from, on the Group W bench. They're not going to tell you about an award they won. They're not going to tell you something. They're going to say, oh, there was the time when my family forgot me at the gas station in Indiana. There were 5 of us piled into the Oldsmobile, and, I knew just to sit there, and eventually someone would realize. And, I talked to the guy who was pumping gas, and, I was 6, and I thought, well, he seems nice if he's going to be my new family. There are worse things. Most of us come up with something awful that happened, that by making it into a funny story, we have a funny story about some huge wound that we can heal through narrative. through language, because we are then not the object that the thing happened to. We're the storyteller. We're the agent behind the story. And that gives us that sense of control, authenticity, agency, all the rest of those often overused, now bankrupted words. But it gives you the chance to say, this is mine. I can take it, I can leave it, I can shape it the way I want to. And I think that's one of the reasons that humor is as powerful as it is because it gives us the chance to reintegrate ourselves when, again, somebody is using humor as a weapon. Humor can be a weapon, a shield. It could be the way you let people into your life, or it's the way you make sure that they don't have entry. So on number 84 is that laughter is as close as you can get to a hug without touching. Because, right, as you guys know, when you laugh together, there's an intimacy there, right? And you can tell when somebody's faking it and when they're not. You can tell when somebody's really getting it. And that laughter is a sign that for that moment, you're on the same wavelength as other people. And that's why it's such an intimate thing. And that's one of the reasons I'd love to know what you thought about this. I worry about us increasingly having these experiences of humor or a fear in isolated places. When you laugh with people, it brings you together. I worry about, again, thinking of especially my students, but all of us. Like, I remember I went to the opening night because a friend of mine had done post-production work on Airplane. So that's a million years ago.
Yeah.
And it was in it was the Paris Theater, whatever, New York City movie house. And no one had seen this, as an entire in public thing before, entity before. And the laughter of the soundtrack from Jaws and the plane coming up to the screen, everybody laughed. And then there was one scene, and again, I'm showing the fact that I memorized movies, which is why I can't do math. I remember like certain things.
That's where that space is used.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah. There's only so much room in a brain for good stuff.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And so, and I think I'm doing the right, curating for me.
I believe so.
And but there's one point at which a lady comes on and explains to the flight attendant, "Dear, I can speak jive," and it is Barbara Billingsley, and
Leave It to Beaver's mom,
June Cleaver. Yeah.
But for 1 second, the theater was silent. And somebody in the back yelled, "June Cleaver!" And it burst into applause because you could see, 400 people trying to make that one synaptic connection.
They were trying to just, yeah,
yeah.
And it couldn't do, but it was this outpouring of respect and affection for whoever realized it was June Cleaver and couldn't remember Barbara Billings. There's June Cleaver was as close as we were going to get. It was such an amazing community of response. And I would hate to think of this increasingly becoming something we do in smaller and smaller groups or by ourselves.
We could do this for another 50 minutes. Go get Gina School. It's a really fine book. It's available wherever fine books are sold and also the other places. And, just get a copy, leave it around. Bathroom reading right there. You got it. Your bathroom reading just before you go to bed reading. Instead of the TV reading, it will be there for you. And it's a beautiful work. It's Gina all the way. Once you've read this book, you'll get a good sense of where it came from. And Gina Barreca, thank you from the musical Innertube.
Thank you, guys. I'm so happy to see you. I'm grateful for you. See you again soon.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Or log into our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
Our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.